And then, once we have completed the research, what do we do with it? Well, we analyze it, and then we make the recommendation. So analyze and interpret the data. We talked about this a little bit. We don't expect you to be able to do advanced statistical analyses. You should be able to do basic statistics, regression. You should be able to do correlation, spreadsheet type analysis, but multivariate modeling and or structural equation modeling, that kind of fine stuff. Just need to know that if that's necessary, you can get the people to do it for you. And then you need to understand the limitations that went into the research. So again, you never are able to measure exactly what you're measuring, so we need to take into account that although this study was designed for ice cream flavors for teenagers, some of the data that we used was developed from seniors. We just need to be aware that there may be a generalizability issues if the tastes of seniors are not the same as the tastes of teenagers. And we know they're not. Because I was sharing with my loving son many years ago, not many years, just a few years ago, that I had acquired a taste for hot sauce. And says, I was starting to enjoy spiciness in my food, and he tactfully responded to me, "Yes, Dad, I still have taste buds." I don't need to shock the system to get a feeling. And then don't overgeneralize. Don't say, you know, I sampled teenagers and teenagers prefer blue. That means that everybody prefers blue. No, it means that teenagers prefer blue. And there's a tendency, especially if you're proud of your research, to, well, this applies to everything. This is really a groundbreaking thing. And then make your recommendation. And this is when I work with student projects. This is the one that sometimes people have the hardest time on, is you finish the research project and you say, we finished the research project and 30% prefer red, 20% prefer blue, 40% had no opinion. That's nice. What was the research question? And based on your findings, what is the answer to the question? There's a tendency, if you're not confident, just to report the results of the research and not connect the dots and make the conclusion. How does this apply to what you're trying to do? It's your job to make the recommendation, not just summarize the statistics. So you say, it was 30% blue, 20% red, 40% undecided. Based on this, we would probably go ahead and plan on blue, but understand that there may not be a very strong preference for color. After all, let's focus on flavor. And then make your recommendation. For major research reports, you're going to have a formal report. And a typical formal report starts with an executive summary, has the methodology, which talks about the way that data was collected, talks about what the results of the research were, discloses the limitations, and then makes your recommendation. And again, one of the things that people, when I see student projects, is an executive summary is not an introduction. An executive summary is a spoiler alert. You want to give it all away. Tell me what the question was, what the results were, and what the recommendation was, 1 page or less. And the way that that works is, in business, the way that formal research projects happen is there's executive decision makers, and then there's people who are going to be, actually implementing the decision. And at the executive level, at the top level, I don't need to get buried in the details of your research. Just give me the bottom line, tell me what it is, and then depending on the decision, if I agree to go ahead with whatever I was going to go ahead with based on your research, then I'm going to hand it off to somebody who's going to have to execute, and that person is really going to want to dig into the details. So the executive summary literally is for the executives who don't need to get into the details but just want to know, tell me what it is, and then I leave it to the people who are going to be responsible for executing the decision to dig into the details and make sure that this is something that we can work with well. Just to impress you, this is, I believe, this is that research project that I was talking about where we used this nose sample, but this was the the contents page for the formal report that we sent to the organization. And you can see we've got the introduction, the executive summary, we've got the introduction, talk about the findings, and then many times in a research they also include the questions, just so that if you're trying to figure out whether or not the research is valid for your use, if they actually show you the questions that they ask, then you can be in a much better situation than if you get the conclusions. And just a word of advice, I think I can talk about this in a minute, so let me do that. Yeah, I think I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but in case I don't, I will forget it entirely. Okay, and then you act. Remember, this was to inform a decision, so the results of the research question feed into the business decision, and based on the results of the research and other information that you use to inform the business decision, you take an action. And then after you've taken the action, remember there's no such thing as a good decision or a bad decision at the time that you make it. After you've made the decision, you evaluate whether or not it was a good decision or a bad decision. And when you're evaluating whether or not it was a good decision or a bad decision, you want to evaluate the outcome of the decision, whether or not it worked or it didn't work. And you also want to evaluate the process. You know, did we do a good job of getting the information that we needed that helped us make the decision, or was that kind of a waste of time, waste of money? Questions on market research? Based on my scientific survey, I would see that there are no questions. There's a correlation between no questions and understanding of the materials, so there's a 100% correlation between. And let's go get ice cream.